Go for it.
Mike, introduce him.
I'm Adam. I work here at Braintree. It will be the third/fourth time I've spoken at ChiPy. I'm a Ruby developer, unfortunately, but at heart, I'm a Python developer. My favorite module is Craft, my raft implementation in Python based off of Lionel's Go implementation. Okay. And I'm going to be talking today about how we develop software here at Braintree, the processes we use that allow us to move fast while still keeping everything secure and reliable and available, and end up with an acquisition at the end of it. So this is how you make a lot of money, apparently. I don't know. So to begin with, we try and build small teams. We try and use the idea of T-shaped people that are not specialists, people who are broad, but also have expertise in areas, and allow us to build one team that can do all the things needed to make a project succeed. It's generally doesn't just consist of developers. You'll also have like a designer or maybe a front-end dev, maybe a data person working with you, a product manager almost always, and you really depend on this team to be the engine that drives all of Braintree forward. The core of the team is the developers. They have always been our resource constraint. How fast we can grow our dev team is the only thing that limits what we can build. We haven't had to worry about how much money we had or what our customers wanted. We always have known what we needed to build, and it's just how fast we can build it. So the only way to make sure that you're doing that is to optimize on how to get the most out of your developers. The product manager's job is to sort of crank up the engine and give it a push. We try and make sure that our product managers are facilitators, that they take care of all of the sort of things that can time delay a project if you don't find out about it until the middle. They try and stay at least a few days to a week ahead of the devs, planning out the work that needs to be done at a sort of half day to couple day type time scale. And they also have responsibilities outside the team, like strategy meetings where they don't directly apply to technical realms so that the developers don't get stuck sitting in those meetings twiddling their thumbs. The dev lead's job on each team is to just keep the other devs out of meetings. Any meeting that can't be avoided by developers, try and send the dev lead so that everyone else has a chance to build context and be coding every day. They work with the PM on high-level technical concerns. That doesn't mean they're making all the technical decisions on the project. In fact, it's the opposite. They're setting direction so that everyone else can take care of the technical decisions at a day-to-day, week-to-week level. They write the more technical cards. They try to make sure that anything that the PM doesn't understand or doesn't realize is subject to technical constraints gets dealt with effectively. They want to make sure there are no technical blockers for production release. You don't end up with no hardware wrapped 3 weeks before you need to go to production. And they organize streams of work. So they need to make sure that things that are depended on by later parts of work is done first, and that we get as parallel as possible so that anybody who finishes up their work a little early will always have something else to go work on. We have 1 week iterations here. Everything is sort of built around that. On Monday, the team gets together in a planning meeting, try and keep it to somewhere in the half an hour to an hour range at most, and go through the cards, select the work, do some time estimation at a more fine-grained level than maybe the product manager can do by themselves, and make sure the whole team understands where the product is going and what's being worked on, so that you don't have to pick ahead of time who's going to be doing every individual thing. Very often, the streams of work will be loosely defined at the beginning of the week, but that can always change. But making sure everyone has context, you don't limit yourself to a particular configuration of people. And if you want to, like, for example, rotate who's working with who in the middle of the week, you can do that because everyone's up to speed. We do have a stand-up meeting every day. Most of the teams do this at 9 or 9:15 or later, but whenever they start the workday, they try to do this first thing. Keep everybody on a day-to-day basis at the same place with regards to the work. Try and keep it under 10 minutes. Sometimes these can balloon. You get into these second, third level discussions where somebody brings something up and you want to talk about it, and you talk about how they talked about it. but most of the time, we try and keep it very straightforward, very short. Review any decisions that you made as a pair the previous day, so that going forward, again, you can always switch up who's working on something without losing too much ground. And so that any mistakes that might have been made in reasoning or just technical knowledge can be caught up and fixed as soon as possible. And then also a plan for the day. Things do come up, you have to deploy to get some bug fix out, that kind of thing. That's the sort of stuff that you discuss in stand-up. We pair on everything. We have people pairing on design work, front-end development now. Formerly that wasn't true, but we have expanded to that recently. And we always have our primary dev team pairing. And that's great for sharing context, great for sharing skills and ability with the tools and just tips and tricks, but also ways of thinking. It's hard to focus, like actually be typing with great attention to detail all day. So it allows people to sort of take turns. One person can sit back, the other person can be focused, and you can sort of think high level and alternate that with like sort of nitty-gritty paying attention. And when you do have something that's a little more DevOpsy that maybe you don't know how to do, you got to write some complicated Puppet scripts or something like that. You just have somebody come in and sort of work with you on that. You try to make sure that knowledge doesn't live completely outside the team. And the same thing on the other side with some complicated JavaScript or some weird CSS. We are all about TDD. We TDD as much as we possibly can. Every pair is responsible for writing a full suite of automated tests to cover any work that they do. We do also have a very small QA team of one who does a lot of sort of automated browser testing, full stack testing, stuff like that crosses a lot of layers and a lot of teams. But anything that you do, you are expected to be responsible for the quality of that code. It's not some other post operation to make that code actually work. And every pair should be able to and is able to deploy to our QA environment to sort of spin everything up and see how it works to actually click through the form, send in some API requests, and see how the full stack functions. And often before something gets released, most of the time with customer-facing changes, the product manager will sort of review it to make sure that the requirements were actually implemented correctly, that everybody understood there was no communication failure along the way, that what you've created is actually what was intended. Decisions are made constantly. Every day you're deciding how to structure some code, whether to spend time refactoring or not. Often, if you have a distributed system, which side of the boundary to put the complexity on. And a lot of what we've discussed up to now, the purpose of that is to push decision-making down to each pair so that every pair has the context necessary to make the right decision right there without having to wait and check on IAM, is this person in the office today, but just be able to move forward, to keep that pace rolling that is so important. And the PM and the dev lead are not there to make these decisions. They're there for context, advice, and for a sanity check once a decision has been made. And this allows us to, sure, sometimes work gets rolled back or thrown away or refactored pretty seriously, but as much as possible, we're always moving forward. No silos is a really important thing we try and do here. We don't want ever just one person or just someone who's a front-end dev maybe to understand how the JavaScript works. You always want to make sure that throughout the stack there's a broad variety of people who have the ability to pick that up and work on it at any time. If you have silos, it prevents parallelization. It means that you've got a bottleneck sometimes where only one person has to process through a whole bunch of things before everyone else can get moving again. And it also, obviously, not having silos gets rid of the bus factor. There's no one person who, if they're on an airplane, you're just screwed. As a quick summary, it's a very minimalist process. There's only 2 meetings, your IPM, beginning of the week, and your stand-up every morning, which is very short. And we do like expertise. We want people to be able to contribute something special and extra to every team, and we take that into account when we hire people. We look for something that you're really going to bring to the team that you excel at, but not specialization. We don't want somebody who can only do a narrow thing, or is, even worse, is needed to do a narrow thing. We spread context to push decisions down as far as possible into the normal workflow, rather than have them being made in some centralized place. And it's also really important to us that the team is the unit,
The team is the one who's fulfilling requirements. It's not the individual developer, so that you can really make sure that everyone is capable of fulfilling a wide variety of roles, and you don't end up with too much of one kind of work that only a small group of people know how to do. That's it. I tried to keep it short. I'll take questions now. Yeah, Ross.
How long do your IPMs usually run?
How long do our IPMs usually run? The way things are, I'm just going to describe the current situation, is that here in Chicago, we have sort of a larger team, sort of called, we used to be the green team, it's sort of called the Braintree systems team, but it's something like 35 people, and we sort of all come into this room for 10 minutes on Mondays, maybe have a quick update on some things that happened. If people need to move between teams, that's when it generally happens. Who's on call this week? Because whoever's on call moves to a separate team, and who else is sending someone to go work with the on-call person on the sort of interruption work for the week. And then we break up into small units. So that meeting is really 10 minutes or something. And then we break up into smaller units and we discuss the specific work for that week, who we're going to pair up with. Some teams do rotate, like on Wednesday. So you'll do like Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday morning. But most teams stay with one pair for the whole week. So and then your individual IPM sort of pick a stream of work, pick someone to anchor that work for the week, and then the rest of the team sort of gets assigned out to work on those people. And it's generally not the PM or the dev lead saying, you're working on this, you're working on that. It's, I want to work on this, I want to work on that. So the IPM, if you count both parts, I'd still say we're generally done by 9:45. So 40 minutes maybe. Yeah.
So you guys mentioned that you're TDD-oriented team, and there's one QA person that does the functional or systems test. Could you describe how you look at functional tests and elaborate on the tools that you use for functional tests?
Yeah, well, the TDD is not just unit testing. The question was, how do we do sort of higher level testing given that we only have one QA engineer who does a very small part of our testing? We do a lot of functional testing, integration testing, sort of like API level testing, even within the normal workflow. So it's not just sort of low level unit tests. You all are often testing the full stack. If it requires other services to be spun up, then that will be an integration test, but you're still talking about writing cross-project tests pretty frequently, maybe not on a daily basis, but very frequently, weekly, that kind of level. So we are very much sort of RSpec in our main projects. We've done a lot of sort of Mocha in the past on the JavaScript side. We're still sort of trying different things for JavaScript testing. We do a lot of sort of various ways of abstracting sauce labs for multi-browser, multi-platform testing.
So you use Sauce Lab?
We do use sauce labs for a lot of the sort of multi-platform, multi-browser stuff. Yeah.
Do you use a card system, a board, paperclips? Do you have a Scrum Master test by yourselves?
We don't have any sort of Scrum Master. The question was sort of how do we organize our work as far as do we have a Kanban, do we have a cardboard, card wall, anything like that, and do we have a Scrum Master? We don't have anyone who's sort of in charge of that. Everybody makes cards. It's sort of the PM's job to organize them, make sure they're detailed enough, that kind of thing most of the time, with help from the dev lead. But we right now we use Mingle as our sort of digital card wall. It's a favorite of our product managers, who are the ones who spend the most time doing that kind of stuff. So we sort of let them say, you're the ones that are mostly using this product, so you get to choose. The developers actually prefer Trello. We like the sort of simpler flow. But we do use Mingle almost exclusively right now. Yeah.
No silos issue, making sure that developers can onboard into a project with things. Do you guys have any kind of procedures in place or standards as far as documentation?
The question was what we do as far as documentation for projects to help avoid siloing and make sure that knowledge is always findable, that you can discover it, you can learn it when you need to. We don't write much documentation at all. We basically try and have a broad variety of people work on anything. So we're not talking about 2 people with the knowledge, we're talking about 5. And in addition, we write a lot of tests. We really do. We're talking about many, many, many times, I don't know, 10 to 20 times the lines of code, maybe even more in our test suite. So we're talking about tests that are very much supposed to serve as documentation. You can look at a high level and frequently, although not always, you can learn a lot about what the product is supposed to do from those tests. And we also are in an open workspace, and it is always okay to go talk to somebody else and sort of get the 5-minute flash read-in on. But we also do know that by not over-specializing, it does mean sometimes you're going to spend a little more time getting up to speed because you're moving someone new in much more frequently. And we think that it's worth it. And I think that's part of the philosophy as much as anything else, is that the benefits just outweigh the costs. Yeah.
So thanks for your presentation. I like that it was short,
Sure.
but it's very direct. Thanks. So 2 interrelated questions. Does the project manager use business or technical metrics to predict developers' development time? And how often are the predictions accurate? And kind of coupled with that, who and how is an iteration as you stated scoped?
Yeah, I mean, it's... Sorry, the question was sort of, how does the product manager size work and prioritize work to sort of project how much time a developer is going to take? Is it based on technical issues, business issues? It is, of course, both. Sometimes something needs to be done. Last year, around this time, I was, spending 36 hours in 3 days to get our first Australian sign-up form out. That's almost never happens to the point where you have a hard deadline that's that close. Most of the time, we try and base everything off the technical side. We just do as much as possible in the time we have. And more often than not, we let deadlines slip rather than cutting scope. Scope's more likely to creep, but obviously not at the same level it is a lot of places that don't do sort of agile development. Still have that problem. But yeah, the estimates are not that accurate. I'd say if you're within a factor of 2, that's an incredible win. If you're within a factor of 5, that's normal. I'd say over a week, on average, you'll be within 50% to 2 times, sort of that factor of 2. Within any given card, you're often off by an order of magnitude, like 10 times either way. We get cards that just get 15 minutes of research and then the card just gets moved over to done. And we have that small that turns into a 2-week-long, 2-person, like 60, 70 man-hour project. I think that we don't put too much emphasis on that, and partly because it's a rapidly changing industry, and so focusing too much on planning can actually be bad. It does mean maybe we're a little too reactive sometimes. I'm just sort of giving you my general impression. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Okay, great. Yeah.
How do you guys think about your product managers? Have you found in a particular background, whether it's they're developers or they were in IT support or business, on the business side, is most effective in that role?
I think that all of the product managers that we have were product managers before they came here. So I think their background is product management. Now, if you go a little further back, we have a designer, we have a recruiter, and we have somebody who is more on the business side right now. A couple people who are more on the sort of ops side originally. I think that we found that we don't have a lot of product managers. We have a relatively small number compared to most places. And I think that as a result, what we're looking for is people who already have experience doing it. So I'm not sure we know what background makes a good product manager other than they've already learned how. Yeah. Yeah, back to you.
Do you guys employ any remote developers at all?
So we do have 4 main offices, each of which started out small enough to count as a remote developer, I'd say. Each of the satellite ones, specifically Palo Alto and San Francisco. Those are growing. We have one guy in Seattle who works mostly solo, occasionally pairs with people down in Palo Alto. He was 3-year veteran at Braintree before he began working remote. And then on the Venmo side, the part of the business, the consumer side that's based out in New York, they have a couple of remote people more on the DevOpsy side. So the answer is mostly no. We do have a process that's very sort of face-to-face interaction heavy, and it's what works for us. Yeah?
So how often do defects make it to production and how serious?
How often do defects make it to production? So we sort of, not in any official way, but in reality we have a fairly different sort of expected defect level in our different products. So the things that are core transaction processing, we have a very low defect level because we have to. Or we have a very low defect level that affects production processing. Things are imperfect, but not non-functional. Fairly often. For some of our other products that are maybe very asynchronous, where you can really go in and fix something before it really matters, certainly a higher defect level, partly because you're just spending less developer time because you can. I'm not sure there's any single answer to that, but it's rare for serious bugs to make it into production in our sort of transaction processing pipeline. But everywhere else, it's fairly common and generally fairly minor. Yeah.
You mentioned you guys write a lot of tests, and so other than coverage, what other metrics do you guys do?
We essentially don't use coverage as a metric at all. We have run coverage reports from time to time. I think we have an automated build that runs on our CI server that's just testing coverage. But I don't even have any idea what it is. Because I think the first time we ever ran it was already well over 90%. So we don't use coverage because we write so many tests that we don't need to. Really, almost all code is driven out by tests. The exception is when you do a refactor and you end up actually not just moving things around, but writing new code to replace old code. And sometimes the tests don't cover all the same branches that they would have otherwise because things have been moved around. We're not big on metrics for testing. We have some people here who would like us to do it more, but no, we really don't have any metrics that we use to evaluate that, other than we have a lot of people working on the same code. There's no one pair that's going to be only working on one thing. So if there's holes, they get found by the developers. One last question.
So who decides on the pairing and how often do you change that and how much time do you actually spend?
Who decides on the pairing and how often you change? Yeah, I mean, I'd say that a person is generally on a team of this sort of 6-person size for a few months to a year, maybe. Sometimes less, but generally not too much more, except for Lionel. And so people move between teams at a relatively slow rate, but we have enough people that there's almost always someone moving that week. And as far as how often you're pairing with one other person, we really are talking about rotating every week. I will pair with one person Monday through Friday morning, and then I will be pairing with someone else the next week. And Friday afternoons, most people work solo. It's sort of our open development time, so you're working on your own thing, not the same things you're working on the rest of the week.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll go right into it because I don't know if